Hi, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Your support means a lot. Let's get started.
The Boundless Oath. The wind howled like a wild beast as the stars flickered above the quiet village of Arendelle. Orion Fletcher, a blacksmith's apprentice, stood by the forge, his hands blackened with soot. Tonight, however, his mind was far from the metal he shaped. The strange dreams had returned, the ones with burning skies, voices of thunder, and a figure cloaked in shadows who called his name. Orion. The voice whispered in his ears again, faint but unrelenting. He shook his head and muttered, "Just a dream. Nothing more." But the ground trembled. The forge fires flickered, then roared violently. Orion stumbled backward as a golden glow seeped from the cracks in the ground, forming an intricate symbol he had never seen before. The air grew thick with an otherworldly hum, and then came the blinding light. When it faded, a woman stood before him. Her armor shimmered like liquid silver, and her eyes blazed with the intensity of 1,000 suns. She held a staff, crowned with a gemstone that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Orion Fletcher," she said, her voice echoing with divine authority. "The fates have chosen you." Orion blinked, half expecting to wake up in his cot. "Chosen? For what? And who are you?" "I am Lyra, keeper of realms," she said. "And you, mortal, hold the key to the survival of all worlds." Before Orion could protest, Lyra raised her staff. The ground beneath them dissolved, and they plummeted into an endless void. Orion's screams echoed as stars and shadows twisted around him. And then silence. They landed in a vast hall, its ceiling adorned with constellations that moved like living creatures. 12 thrones encircled the space, each occupied by a figure more imposing than the last. These were no mortals. These were gods. One rose, his eyes like molten gold. "You bring him here, Lyra. A boy with no power, no name worthy of our halls." "He is more than he seems," Lyra replied firmly. "The prophecy of Aether speaks of one who will forge the Boundless Oath, uniting gods and mortals. He is the spark." Orion, overwhelmed and shaking, managed to stammer, "I think you've got the wrong person." The golden-eyed god sneered, "We shall see. But be warned, mortal. The path ahead will demand more than courage. Fail, and not even the gods can save you." As the gods began to murmur among themselves, Lyra leaned closer to Orion. "Your journey begins now. The weapon of Aether waits, but you must claim it before he does." "Who's he?" Orion asked, dread creeping into his voice. Lyra's gaze darkened. "A god who has forsaken us all. And if he succeeds, he will tear apart everything, your world and ours." The wind in the celestial hall turned, sharp as Lyra led Orion through a shimmering portal. It wasn't a doorway in the traditional sense. It was more like stepping through a liquid mirror, rippling and reforming as they passed. On the other side lay a sprawling expanse of golden sands under a blood-red sky. Towering monoliths of black stone dotted the landscape, and in the far distance, a massive fortress loomed. "What is this place?" Orion asked, shielding his eyes from the glaring light. "The Nexus," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "It connects the realms, but this isn't your destination. The trials await beyond the fortress." Orion frowned. "Trials? You mean tests, right? Like puzzles or something?" Lyra gave a humorless chuckle. "The Aether weapon is not guarded by riddles, mortal. The trials will test your strength, your mind, and your heart. Few survive them." The weight of her words hit Orion like a hammer. He glanced at his calloused hands. A far cry from the divine might these gods seemed to expect of him. "And what happens if I don't survive?" Lyra turned to him, her piercing gaze softening ever so slightly. "Then we are all doomed." Their journey to the fortress was far from uneventful. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been any, and strange whispers danced on the wind. At one point, a serpent-like creature with glowing green eyes emerged from the sands, its fangs dripping venom. Orion barely managed to dodge as Lyra dispatched it with a flick of her staff. "Stay close," she warned. "The sands themselves are alive here." By the time they reached the fortress, Orion was drenched in sweat and struggling to catch his breath. The fortress gates groaned open of their own accord, revealing a cavernous interior, lined with jagged crystals that pulsed with faint blue light. "This is where I leave you," Lyra said, stepping back. "What?" Orion's voice cracked. "You're not coming with me. These are your trials, Orion. No one can guide you through them." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, strength isn't just muscle, and courage isn't the absence of fear. Trust your instincts. Before he could protest, the gates slammed shut, leaving him alone in the dimly lit hall. The first trial began almost immediately. The air grew colder, and the crystals dimmed until only darkness remained. Then came the voices, soft at first, then louder, overlapping, taunting. "You're nothing. A mere mortal, weak and useless. Go back to your little forge, boy." Orion gritted his teeth. "You're not real," he muttered, stepping forward. The voices grew harsher. He clutched his ears, but they pierced through. "You will fail. You will die here, and no one will remember your name." His legs buckled, and he fell to his knees. Tears burned his eyes as despair threatened to consume him. Then, faint and distant, he heard another voice, a familiar one. "Remember who you are, Orion." It was his mother's voice. She had died years ago, yet the memory of her words filled him with warmth. "You are stronger than you think," she had told him once. After a particularly harsh day at the forge, drawing on that memory, Orion pushed himself to his feet. "You're wrong," he said to the darkness. "I'm not nothing." The voices shrieked, but he kept moving forward. With each step, the cold faded, and the crystals reignited, bathing the hall in light. When he reached the end, the voices were silent. The second trial awaited in the next chamber. A massive chasm split the floor, and in the center, a pedestal held a glowing orb. A bridge of floating stones spanned the chasm, but they shifted and crumbled unpredictably. Orion studied the stones, his heart racing. One wrong step would send him plunging into the void below. "Strength isn't just muscle," he murmured, recalling Lyra's words. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stone. It wobbled but held. One step at a time, he moved forward, each movement calculated. Halfway across, the stones began shifting faster, and a gust of wind threatened to throw him off balance. "Focus," he whispered, gripping the orb in his mind as though it were already in his hands. With a final leap, he reached the pedestal and grabbed the orb. The bridge dissolved instantly, but instead of falling, he found himself back in the first chamber. The orb pulsed in his hands, and Lyra's voice echoed in his mind. One trial remains, the hardest of all. The final trial would reveal not only the true nature of the Aether weapon but also the truth about Orion himself, a truth he might not be ready to face. Orion stood in the chamber, the glowing orb still pulsing in his hands. Its light seemed alive, moving like liquid fire under his touch. The room around him shifted, the once stable walls melting into shadows and whispers. He blinked, and suddenly he wasn't in the fortress anymore. He was standing in a small, firelit cabin, a place he hadn't seen in over a decade. This can't be real," he whispered. The wooden walls, the faint scent of pine resin, the table cluttered with tools. It was his childhood home. But how? Before he could move, a familiar voice stopped him cold. "Orion, pass me the hammer, will you?" His breath caught. He turned slowly to see his father, alive and well, standing at the workbench. The man's broad shoulders and weathered hands were just as he remembered, but there was a warmth in his eyes that Orion hadn't seen in years. "Not since the accident, father." Orion's voice cracked. The man frowned. "What's wrong, boy? You look like you've seen a ghost." Orion staggered back, the orb slipping from his hands and vanishing into the floor. "You're not real, you died when the forge exploded." The scene around him flickered, like a flame struggling against the wind. His father's face darkened, twisting into something cruel. "And whose fault was that?" "What?" Orion stammered, stepping back further. "You were supposed to check the valves, but you didn't, did you?" The man's voice grew harsher, echoing unnaturally. "Your carelessness killed me, Orion. You destroyed everything." "No, that's not true," Orion shouted, clutching his head. The room shattered like glass, and he fell to his knees, gasping for air. When he looked up, he was back in the fortress, but the orb was gone, and standing in its place was a figure cloaked in shadow. "Well done, mortal," the figure said, its voice dripping with mockery. "You've survived the second trial, but do you have the stomach for the truth?" "Who are you?" Orion demanded, rising to his feet. The figure stepped closer, and for a brief moment, the shadows peeled away to reveal a face that made Orion's blood run cold. It was his own. "I am what you could become," the shadow said, grinning wickedly. "If you fail." Orion's heart pounded as the shadow vanished, replaced by Lyra, who appeared in a flash of light. She looked pale, her usual confidence replaced with something close to fear. "You've been marked," she said, her voice trembling. Marked? By what? Not what? Lyra corrected. Who? The Forsaken One knows you now. He has seen your soul, and he will use your greatest fears against you. Orion's fists clenched. Then tell me how to stop him. Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering to the empty pedestal where the orb had been. To defeat him, you must first claim the Aether weapon. But its true form is not steel or stone, it is something far greater. Something only you can awaken. What does that even mean? Orion demanded. You'll understand when the time comes, Lyra said. But beware, Orion. The Forsaken One is closer than you think. And the gods. Not all of them are your allies. Before he could question her further, the fortress walls began to quake. A deafening roar filled the chamber, and the ceiling split open to reveal a swirling vortex of darkness. From it emerged a massive, serpent-like creature with glowing red eyes. The Forsaken One's servant, Lyra said, raising her staff. It's here to stop you. Orion's hands instinctively reached for a weapon, but he had none. Lyra shoved him aside as the serpent lunged, its fangs missing him by inches. Run, she shouted, her staff unleashing a beam of light that only seemed to anger the creature. But Orion didn't run. Something inside him, perhaps the spark Lyra had spoken of, ignited. He grabbed a shard of crystal from the floor and charged at the serpent, plunging it into the beast's side. The creature screeched, its body convulsing before collapsing in a heap. Lyra stared at him, wide-eyed. You're not supposed to have that kind of strength yet. Orion dropped the shard, his hands trembling. I don't know what happened. I had to stop it. Lyra's expression hardened. Then the trials have already begun to change you. But we have no time to waste. The final chamber awaits. As they made their way deeper into the fortress, Orion couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadow's words echoed in his mind, you've been marked. What awaited him in the final chamber would test not just his strength and courage, but the very core of who he was, and the truth might be more than he could bear. The final chamber wasn't like anything Orion had seen before. It wasn't a room, but an endless expanse of swirling stars and cascading light. The floor beneath him was made of translucent glass, through which he could see entire galaxies spinning far below. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it, a blade. The weapon wasn't what he had expected. It wasn't adorned with jewels or etched with ancient runes. It was simple, almost plain, a long, curved blade with a silver hilt that seemed to hum faintly with energy. This is the Aether weapon? Orion asked, his voice echoing in the vastness. Lyra nodded. The blade of Aether. It is no ordinary weapon. It is bound to the soul of its wielder, amplifying their essence. Only those who are pure of heart and unyielding in purpose can wield it. Orion stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the hilt. The moment his fingers brushed the blade, the chamber darkened. The stars flickered and died, replaced by a suffocating void. A voice boomed from the darkness, deep and venomous. You dare claim what is mine? Orion spun around, the blade now in his grip. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in black fire. His presence was overwhelming, his eyes glowing with malice. This was no mere god, this was the Forsaken One. Lyra stepped in front of Orion, her staff blazing with light. You will not take him, Malvok. His destiny is beyond your grasp. The Forsaken One, Malvok laughed, the sound sending chills down Orion's spine. Do you really think he can defeat me? Look at him. He's a boy, not a savior. Orion clenched the blade tighter. I may not be a god, but I won't let you destroy everything. Malvok sneered. Oh, how noble. But tell me, mortal, did Lyra tell you the whole truth about your destiny? Orion glanced at Lyra, who remained silent, her jaw tight. Of course she didn't, Malvok continued, his voice dripping with mockery. They only told you what they needed to, didn't they? How convenient. What is he talking about? Orion demanded, his voice shaking. Malvok stepped closer, his fiery aura illuminating the chamber. The blade of Aether doesn't just amplify your soul, it consumes it. Every swing of that blade will drain you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. That's why the gods sent you a mortal expendable enough to wield it in their place. Orion's grip faltered. He turned to Lyra, his heart pounding. Is that true? Lyra hesitated, her eyes filled with regret. It is. But you used me, Orion said, his voice breaking. You are the only one who can stop him, Lyra pleaded. Your soul is stronger than any god's. If you don't do this, everything will end, your world, your people, everything. Malvok laughed again, his flames flaring. And there it is. The truth. You are nothing more than a pawn in their game. Orion's mind raced. The blade in his hand felt heavier than before, its hum now a deep, menacing thrum. He could feel its power coursing through him, but he also felt the truth of Malvok's words. The weapon was alive, feeding off his very essence. You don't have to fight me, Malvok said, his tone almost gentle. The gods have betrayed you, just as they betrayed me. Join me, and I will spare your world. Together, we can remake it free from their tyranny. Orion stared at the blade, its soft glow now feeling like a living thing, pulsing in rhythm with his quickening heart. Malvok's words echoed in his mind, stirring doubts he couldn't suppress. Had the gods truly sent him here to die? Were they so willing to sacrifice him for their own survival? Don't listen to him, Lyra shouted, stepping closer to Orion. He's twisting the truth, as he always does. Yes, the blade takes, but it also gives strength, clarity, purpose. You were chosen because your soul burns brighter than any god's. Malvok's laughter cut through her words like a blade. I, the ever-loyal Lyra, tell him the whole truth. Why don't you? How it was your kind who created me, who cast me into the void when I refused to bow. Orion's grip on the blade tightened, the weight of both their words pressing on him. He turned to Lyra. Is he lying? Did the gods create him? Lyra's face was pale, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and determination. We did, she admitted, her voice trembling. Long ago, Malvok was one of us, a god of ambition and progress. But his hunger for power consumed him. He sought to take the ether for himself, to enslave mortals and gods alike. We had no choice but to imprison him. And now, Malvok growled, his flames flaring, they expect you to clean up their mess, to wield a blade that will destroy you in the process. Also they can remain unscathed. Orion's chest tightened. The betrayal cut deep, but so did the weight of what was at stake. His village, his family, his world, all of it depended on him. You speak as if you're any better, Orion said, his voice steadying as he faced Malvok. You destroy everything for your revenge. You're no savior, you're just another tyrant. Malvok's fiery form surged forward, his voice a roar that shook the chamber. And what are you, boy? A hero? A mere mortal who thinks he can stand against me? Orion raised the blade, the weight of it suddenly feeling natural in his hand. I may be mortal, but I've fought my entire life to survive. I won't stop now. The blade ignited in a blinding light as Malvok charged, his black flames colliding with Orion's resolve. The clash sent shockwaves through the chamber, tearing at the stars and glass floor. Orion gritted his teeth, every swing of the blade sending a surge of energy through him, but also draining something deep inside. Malvok was relentless, his attacks fueled by centuries of rage. Orion dodged and countered, the blade singing as it sliced through the air. But with each strike, he felt the weapon pulling at him, chipping away at his strength. You can't win, mortal, Malvok bellowed. Your soul is weak, fragile. You'll burn out before you can defeat me. Orion stumbled back, his knees nearly buckling. The blade felt heavier now, its glow dimming. Malvok advanced, his form towering over him. Let me end this, Malvok said, his voice cold and calculating. Surrender the blade, and I'll spare you the agony. You've done enough. Orion closed his eyes, his mind racing. He thought of his father, his village, the forge where he had spent years learning to shape steel into something more. He thought of the lives that would be lost if he failed. You're wrong, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Malvok paused. What? Orion opened his eyes, the blade suddenly blazing brighter than before. I'm not fragile. I'm not weak. I've been forged through fire, just like this blade. And I'm not afraid to give everything if it means protecting the people I love. With a roar, Orion lunged, the blade cutting through Malvok's fiery form. The Forsaken One screamed, his essence fracturing and dissipating into the void. But as Orion delivered the final blow, a surge of energy erupted from the blade, consuming him in searing light. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. Orion lay on the floor, the blade of ether resting beside him. His body felt heavy, his strength nearly gone, but he was alive. Lyra knelt beside him, her expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. You did it, she said softly. The Forsaken One is no more. Orion managed a weak smile. And the blade? Lyra picked it up carefully. The weapon was silent now, its glow extinguished. Its power has been spent. but so has yours. He frowned. What do you mean? Lyra hesitated before speaking. The blade didn't just consume your strength, it bound itself to your soul. You are no longer just a mortal, Orion. You are something more, and something less. Orion's heart sank. I can't go home, can I? Lyra shook her head. The power within you would destroy the mortal world, but your sacrifice has ensured its survival. You've saved them all. As the realization settled in, Orion felt a strange sense of peace. He had given everything, but it had been worth it. Lyra stood, offering him a hand. Come, there is a place for you among the stars. A place where your strength will be needed again. Orion took her hand, rising to his feet. Together, they stepped into the void, leaving behind the mortal world he had fought so hard to protect. The void Orion stepped into was not cold or empty, as he had imagined. It was alive, a sea of shifting colors and energy that pulsed like a living heartbeat. Lyra walked ahead, her silhouette outlined by the ethereal glow of this strange realm. Where are we? Orion asked, his voice echoing softly. The Forge Eternal, Lyra said, her tone reverent. This is where the gods' greatest creations are born. Weapons, stars, worlds, everything begins here. Orion glanced around. He saw massive constructs floating in the distant, stools of unimaginable size, anvils as large as mountains, and rivers of molten light flowing into endless horizons. The air vibrated with the hum of creation. This is where you belong now, Lyra continued, stopping before a massive gate made of swirling light and shadow. Your soul is bound to the ether, and this place will sustain you. Here, you will learn to harness your new strength, to shape the forces within you into something greater. Orion hesitated, his gaze falling to his hands. They no longer felt entirely his own. The fight with Malvok, the blade's power, the cost of victory, it had changed him. He could feel it in his very core, an energy that wasn't mortal, wasn't human. And what if I don't want this? He asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. What if I just want to rest? Lyra turned to him, her expression softening. You've earned rest, Orion, but the Forge does not call those who are not needed. There is more for you to do, though the choice is yours. You are free to walk away, to let the gods handle what comes next. But if you choose to stay, you will become something far greater than what you were. What comes next? Orion asked, his brow furrowing. Before Lyra could answer, the gate shuddered, a wave of energy rippling through the air. A voice deep, resonant, and ancient echoed from beyond it. Enter, Orion of the mortal flame. Orion swallowed hard, his fingers twitching with unease. The voice wasn't threatening, but its power was undeniable. He glanced at Lyra, who nodded encouragingly. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the gate. The moment he did, a blinding light consumed him, and he felt himself being pulled into a new space, a new reality. When the light faded, Orion stood in a vast chamber, its walls adorned with constellations that shifted and moved like living murals. At the center of the room was an anvil glowing with a soft, golden light. Around it stood 5 figures, beings of immense presence, their forms shimmering as if they were made of starlight. Welcome, Orion, one of them said, their voice carrying the weight of galaxies. Who are you? Orion asked, his voice trembling. We are the Forge Masters, the figure replied, the architects of existence. It was we who created the ether, the gods, and the worlds they inhabit. And now, we have called you to join our ranks. Me? Orion's disbelief was palpable. I'm just a mortal. I don't belong here. The Forge Master closest to him stepped forward, their gaze piercing yet kind. You were mortal, but your soul has been tempered, forged in fire and sacrifice. You are no longer bound by the limits of mortality. You are something new, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Orion looked down at his hands again. This time, he could see faint traces of light coursing through his veins, like molten gold. What do you want from me? He asked. To become the keeper of balance, another Forge Master said. The gods have grown complacent, their arrogance blinding them to the harm they cause. You will ensure that their power is used wisely, that their actions do not bring ruin to the worlds they claim to protect. Orion's mind reeled. He had spent his life as a blacksmith, a simple villager. Now, they were asking him to oversee gods themselves. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted. The first Forge Master smiled. You already have. You faced the Forsaken One, a being even we could not destroy, and succeeded. You wielded the blade of ether and did not falter. You have proven yourself, Orion. The choice is yours now. The anvil at the center of the room began to glow brighter, and on it, the blade of ether reappeared, its form now refined and whole. If I take it again, there's no going back, is there? Orion asked. Lyra's voice echoed from behind him, though she was nowhere to be seen. No, but the path forward is yours to shape. Whatever you choose, Orion, you are not alone. Orion took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the blade. He thought of his village, the people he had fought to protect, and the sacrifices he had made. Slowly, he stepped forward, his hand closing around the hilt. The chamber erupted in light, and for a moment, Orion felt both everything and nothing, his mortal life slipping away, replaced by something infinite and unending. When the light dimmed, he stood tall, the blade of ether glowing brightly in his grasp. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady, but I'll do it my way. The Forge Masters nodded in unison. Then it begins. As the stars around him shifted and the Forge Eternal thrummed with life, Orion knew this was not the end of his journey. It was only the beginning.